After the ceasefire, Iran mocks the US amid massive celebrations erupting on Tehran streets, with crowds waving flags and filling public squares. Tehran declares a historic victory as protesters chant "Death to America" during jubilant nationwide rallies marking the truce. Iran claims the US was forced to accept its comprehensive 10-point peace proposal after weeks of intense military pressure. Has Trump accepted Iran's conditions on the Strait of Hormuz and continued nuclear enrichment rights under the truce? Will Trump pay compensation to Iran amid truce news, even as Israel alleges a fresh Iranian attack post-ceasefire? Panic grips Israel as missiles reportedly fly with damage mounting right after the ceasefire call shatters fragile calm. As Mujtaba basks in the glow of Iran's historic victory, are Netanyahu and Trump left utterly embarrassed on the world stage? Iranian media mocked the American announcement of a ceasefire, portraying it as a historic victory for Tehran after weeks of intensified conflict. Iranian state-linked narratives described the pause after about 40 days of fighting as a decisive win, suggesting that international pressure and military setbacks forced Washington to seek a truce. Massive demonstrations took place in Tehran following the announcement of the ceasefire, with large crowds gathering in public squares waving flags and chanting slogans. Protesters shouted "Death to America," "Death to Israel," "Death to compromisers," echoing long-standing anti-Western slogans seen in previous wartime rallies. On the evening of April 7th, Trump announced a 2-week truce, explicitly conditioning it on the complete reopening of the Strait of Hormuz to oil shipping. Trump stated that Iran's 10-point proposal provided a workable basis on which to negotiate, signaling that US officials are treating Tehran's terms as a starting point for talks. The first point in the proposal calls for mutual pledge of no new aggression against Iran, creating a baseline for de-escalation. Second, Iran demands continued Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz, insisting on sovereignty over the region's key maritime corridor. Third, the plan includes the acceptance of uranium enrichment under international monitoring, rather than a full nuclear rollback. Fourth, Iran seeks the removal of all primary US sanctions that directly target its government and key sectors. Fifth, the proposal includes the removal of all secondary sanctions that affect third-country entities doing business with Iran. Sixth, Tehran asks for the termination of all relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions tied to its nuclear and missile activities. Seventh, the plan also calls for the termination of certain Board of Governors resolutions from the International Atomic Energy Agency framework. Eighth, Iran demands payment of compensation for damages it attributes to past sanctions and military actions. Ninth, the proposal seeks the withdrawal of US combat forces from the wider Middle East region within a defined time frame. 10th, Iran calls for a cessation of war on all fronts, including against the heroic Islamic resistance of Lebanon, referring to Hezbollah and allied groups. Iranian media have claimed Tehran inflicted significant damage on US military infrastructure across the Middle East, from regional bases to naval assets. Iranian leadership has asserted that within just about 10 days of the conflict, the United States realized it was on the defensive and began to reassess its strategy. The Press TV report further alleges that the US started exploring a ceasefire through indirect channels soon after this shift in the perceived battlefield balance. Earlier on the evening of April 7th, President Donald Trump had confirmed that a ceasefire had been agreed after more than a month of intense war with Iran. Trump announced a suspension of planned new bombing of Iran once a self-imposed deadline for that same day was reached, framing it as a step toward de-escalation. In response, Iran stated that if attacks against it stopped, it would cease defensive operations, indicating a conditional willingness to halt its own strikes. Trump stressed that the truce was contingent on Iran completely, immediately, safely reopening the Strait of Hormuz, tying the pause in fighting to restored global shipping through the key choke point. Tehran said that for the 2-week period, shipping through the Strait of Hormuz would be possible via coordination with its military, signaling that it intended to keep tight control but allow limited passage. Trump said Iran's 10-point proposal was a workable basis on which to negotiate, describing it as a serious framework for moving toward a broader settlement. He added that almost all of the various points of contention had been agreed between the US and Iran, arguing that only a few outstanding issues remained. According to Trump, the 2-week period will allow the agreement to be finalized and consummated, portraying the ceasefire as a window to lock in a more durable deal. For its part, Iran said its decision was based on a US request to negotiate on a broader 15-point proposal. Iran also emphasized that Washington had accepted Tehran's 10-point draft as a framework for discussions. Trump also noted that the truce had been finalized based on talks with Pakistan's Prime Minister and Army Chief, highlighting Islamabad's behind-the-scenes role in mediating between Washington and Tehran. Israel reported fresh missile attacks from Iran on the night of April 7th to 8th, just as news of a truce was confirmed, claiming the barrages had continued despite public talk of de-escalation. According to Israeli officials, Iran fired 2 to 3 distinct waves of missiles since Trump announced the ceasefire, suggesting that launches continued even after Washington's declaration. The Israeli military said some of the incoming Iranian missiles were successfully intercepted by its air defense systems, according to accounts carried by local media. The IDF also claimed that a number of those missiles were equipped with deadly cluster warheads, designed to break up in mid-air and scatter bomblets over wide urban areas. One ballistic missile attack targeting southern Israel triggered warning sirens across the region, as residents were urged to seek immediate shelter. That particular missile aimed at the south was later intercepted before impact, and authorities reported no injuries in that incident. Soon after, Iran launched additional missiles towards central and northern Israel, according to the IDF, broadening the scope of the latest barrage. Impacts were reported in central Israel, possibly caused by cluster submunitions or falling fragments from intercepted missiles, leading to multiple scattered impact sites. Rescue teams rushed to the areas where debris fell, though initial reports indicated there were no immediate casualties, only material damage. Subsequently, sirens sounded yet again in southern Israel as fresh missiles were detected and tracked inbound, keeping large parts of the country on edge.
$25 करोड़ गरीब गरीबी को परास्त करके बाहर निकले।
For the good of our nation, let's work together and let's truly make America great again.
The fastest news breaks.
Requested PM saying that look, you will have to speak to Putin and to Zelensky.
The biggest newsmakers.
The relationship with India is probably the most important bilateral relationship the U.S. will have for the rest of this century.
The capital delivered quite an election result today.
Expert analysis.
The million-dollar question today is how to stop this dance of death.
Ground reports.
I'm standing at the crossroad of the Kumbh Mela. Behind me are more than 100 entry ghats.
Long-form interviews.
Exclusionary politics is reflected in Manipur case as well. You don't bother because this is a small state.
Deep dive into burning issues.
It's often said DRC could be the richest country in the whole world. It's because of what sits underneath.
Why exactly did the US topple the Sheikh Hasina government?
HD videos. We don't just break news, we break it down.